Good morning, Luisa. I have the pleasure of welcoming you to Borderless Executive Life. And today we are going to talk about a topic that is very close to your heart, but also to mine. So we share a common interest here. Luisa Boareto, you are today the Global Head of Diversity, Equity and Inclusion at Grundfos. Before that, you had a career at Dow Chemical and you jumped into this role. You didn't start out there, did you? When I look at your profile, you started in financial services, finance roles. Is that correct?
Yes, and good morning to you, Els, and thanks again for the invitation, as you said, to have a conversation around something we are both passionate around. And you're right, now I have the global responsibility over diversity, equity, and inclusion in Grundfos, but my background is totally different. I have a university degree in economics. And then where I started in Dow, in finance, where I spent 12 years of my career in different finance function, treasury, auditing, different area. But then I was always getting a feeling that I was doing good, I was progressing, but I wasn't accomplished. And I'm glad I followed that gut feeling that sometimes we all have as human beings. And realized that I wanted to shift my career towards something which was closer to my values, which were people and impact. And at the time, I didn't even know that were my value. I discovered them through a coaching journey with a professional coach. At the time where coaching wasn't yet such a common discipline, I think I had the courage and also the opportunity in a company like Dow to steer my career outside of finance. Now, interesting enough, we talk still about 10 years ago. And again, I wasn't the topic it is today. And then I wasn't clear what I wanted to do, but I was still following my intuition, starting the journey on areas that eventually turned out critical to be effective in the end. And specifically, I had an experience in change management, and that taught me change management basics, which are fundamental in DI. The second experience I had, still outside of finance, in what I call now influential leadership, but the job title was a director in Olympics and Sports Solution, because my previous company, Dow, was a Olympic sponsor. Very interesting sponsor because it's a B2B company, so not a possibility to put the Olympic logo on a specific product or a service. But that also helps to understand influential leadership and how to activate a platform like the Olympic for something which is not directly related to the business.
Yes.
And then the other element that really helped me was the coaching. After having experience on my own skin, I became a professional certified coach myself. And that what also taught me about the human potential and power that we all have. And it's really about finding those resources and enabling people to find those resources. Eventually, then there was a change of CEO. There was the new CEO putting inclusion in the new strategy. And what he did was opening up a department called the Office of Inclusion, not reporting to HR, reporting directly to the CEO.
And that was Jim Fitterling.
That was Jim Fitterling, yes. And I would say very visionary. And when then those roles started to open up as regional director, I did apply and got the role as European, Middle East, Africa, and India inclusion responsible at Dow. And that's what I did for 5 years before getting the global responsibility.
Wow. So that's really putting a patchwork of different experiences together that actually leads you in the end to DNI. And that's where you've now been for several years. What keeps you motivated in this role?
It's a good question. I think it's a very energy demanding role. But what gives me energy, because that is the right things to do and whatever step we do is a step that not only helps the company, helps the society we live. And there is more and more a role we have to play in the private sector, because governments, which has always been historically the safeguards of social rights and of progress, are evolving, and I think the private sector has a huge role to play. Doing the right thing, I would say, is what eventually motivates me. And I know it sounds utopistic, and my job is really small, but still there is this feeling of, even if it is a small step, it helps.
Yes. And you talked at the beginning of the conversation about your own values, finding a role that was closely matched with your values. What are the values that this role plays upon for you?
Well, if I look at my personal values, is really related to people.
Mm-hmm.
So as a coach, one of my mission is really to enable people to fulfill their potential, whatever it
Yeah,
is, and not let the discrimination, the systemic biases, whatever we want to call it, to prevent them to deliver their full potential.
yeah,
And then there is the other big value about impact, and there is an element of contributing to a bigger purpose. So those two are for me guiding principle. And then there is a huge element, is an element of integrity
yes,
where you can still serve the purpose for a corporation, which again, it's a corporation as a business purpose, as a return on investment, but at the same time doing the right things. So there is this possibility of matching doing good and doing also business wise. That makes sense.
yeah. We all look for impact, and you mentioned that as well. You've been in this role and you've seen it evolve over time. What positive shifts have you seen over your career in Luisa?
Well, sometimes we tend to focus on the negatives, but I think there is an increased awareness. Now, even, and maybe we will get there, through times of polarization, backlash, you name it, the fact that those topics get to the highest agenda
Yes.
means those topics are relevant. So this is a big shift. And so topics that in the past were practically silent,
Uh-huh.
now, for good or bad, they are brought to the table, to the C-suite, to the politician, to the society. Now,
Yes.
the next step would be to make sure those topics progress. Mm, it takes a lot of energy, of course, to distill what's relevant and being very clear for company, for society, for individual, where do you stand?
Yes. Yeah. In a previous conversation that we had, you mentioned that the current situation where there is, from a geopolitical point of view, more backlash to efforts around the AI, you had told me something that resonated with me. You said, situations like this also create opportunities, and it becomes clear for which type of company this is business strategic and for whom it is not. Can you elaborate on that a little bit? What is your vision there?
Yeah, and indeed, I call it the moment of truth. The moment after George Floyd, it became a topic that company needed to have. Maybe some company didn't ask themselves why they really need it. How does it align to the strategy? We talked before about Jim Fitterling and how we put inclusion
Yes.
into the strategy with 4 pillars, and one was inclusion. So in the moment in which you receive a pushback, like what happened with the executive order, for example, in the US, that creates an opportunity to ask yourself,
Yes.
what's important to us? Is the value we stand for? Is the business model we have? Because let's be honest, again, there are also business repercussions to a certain approach.
Yeah. Yeah. Very clear. And you've gone through a number of years in DNI. What, from your perspective, are things that you've seen working? What have you implemented, for instance, that you said, well, this is something that takes us a step further, that makes this sustainable, and make sure that it keeps being business critical.
Yeah, and I believe what you said, the final two words, business critical, it's really the secret sauce for
Uh-huh.
effective intervention. There are two, about what's working, there are two levels. One is a systemic level. So the ultimate objective of any DAI work would be to create an organization which operates under system and processes which are equitable. If you are really at equitable processes, then automatically it means also you are enabling diversity to thrive.
Yes.
But the other element, so that ideally will become the ideal world in the future, that the best practices, especially on talent cycle, are equitable. And eventually we'll get there. It's again a matter of speed. But the other element, which is critical, is being able to tie the journey to the business of the specific business of a company when you get the extra attention and the energy for the entire organization. And in this way,
Yes.
the journey becomes sustainable.
Can you maybe give an example from your own experience where you say, well, I'm particularly proud that I have achieved that.
Yeah, and I think we were partially of the same when we met the first time in person, at least, Elsa. So what we started, and again, kudos to Dow there. What we realized that really having this business angle was critical, and also
Mm-hmm.
realizing that it's a place of collaboration, and
Mm-hmm.
the power of having multiple companies pursue the same objective is priceless. And that's where we started initially with the European Petrochemical Association to have dedicated session about D&I at EPCA conference, which is the annual conference for EPCA once a year. All the industry in the region meets. And as a spin-off of that effort, there was also the realization that there were specific needs in the industry that needed to be addressed. And a very powerful example is logistics. Logistics is a vital sector for all industry, but especially also for the chemical one. And
Absolutely.
especially to COVID, due to all the geopolitical changes, is under extreme pressure. Now, one of the pressure is also about workforce.
Yes.
And the realization that to the logistics sector, women is underrepresented. Traditionally, is a sector where it's perceived to be long hours, away from home. We can discuss about perception of that.
Yes.
Realizing that if that sector was able to attract more women, actually it would increase the availability of workforce tremendously with a positive ripple effect. And so out of the European Petrochemical Association, there was a spin-off, which was a creation of consortium, which is called Women in Logistics. And again, companies now are joining forces to really address the topic, but from an angle of how we can increase female representation to the logistics sector.
Yeah. So
So
that's really a business need to have more women,
exactly.
to have more people in jobs.
And
Yeah.
then it's not anymore a matter of do you believe in D&I, do not believe. It's a matter of we are here to make our industry and sector more efficient, more operational, viable, et cetera, et cetera. So that's, for me, it's a very clear business example of what I mean when I say D&I to serve the business.
Yeah. And, when you see some practical implementation, I know from the example because, I've also followed along the sideline this initiative. It's always difficult to measure. And if you say, something's business critical, how do you measure actually the effect of anything a company does on D&I policy?
Yeah, it's
What's
an
your
excellent
experience there?
question, and performance. The first one, we know cash is king, right? Finance matters. So we tend, especially in the past, to measure all progresses to financial measure, return on investment. Talk about EBITDA, but it's a return on investment. Now, you remember when ESG came into play, we started to talk about financial and non-financial. So coming to your question, the first thing I think we are trying to measure something which is related to the business, but not a direct correlation. So we need to be careful to really, and I'm using correlation in a statistical way, to find a measure that if you do that, the return is this. On
Yes.
the other side, I do believe what measure get done. So metrics are fundamental. And I do like to separate the D&I matrix in three main categories. The first one is what is one of the most used metrics, and is still, in my opinion, relevant, and is called the representation matrix, the diversity. Gender, people with disability, other metrics you can measure. You enter into the space of GDPR, and that's why often gender seems to be the topic. But
Yes.
it's often the case mostly because of a privacy issue in measuring. So you can access gender data, you cannot access sexual orientation, even people with
No.
disabilities, there are limitations. But there are also studies that demonstrate that if a workplace work for women, work for many diversity. So again, not that gender is more important, but can be measured. But that's
Yes.
representation. Then there is the whole space of what I call perception metrics. And
Yes.
equally important, especially to convince stakeholder which may be skeptical about the business case. An organization is made of people. People to thrive needs to be, to simplify what's said, happy employee, happy customers, right?
Yes.
And what makes happiness is a very personal experience. You and I may be driven by value, someone else may be driven by external motivation, etc. But
Yes.
if you're able to capture through voice of employees, for example, those type of surveys, what matters to people, that's the perception on how they feel. And one element we know, because we're a human being, our energy, our brain actually get really much derailed the moment we don't feel emotionally good.
Yes.
Well, you cannot just say, okay, today I'm working from here up, and
Yeah, no,
if it makes me feel uncomfortable, I will not produce good results because I cannot concentrate, I cannot focus, I cannot deliver.
of
So
course.
that's very important metric, how people perceive, how people feel. And then there is a third type of metric, or two other metrics, which are more related to impact. And one is external impact. Again, for example, what we have discussed, engagement with the industry, with supplier, with customer, supplier diversity, a full universum. But the other one, still borderline between external and internal, is employee engagement. As an employee, how much of my time, voluntary or part of my work, I'm willing to dedicate to those topics? And
Yes.
again, doesn't need to be employee resource group and everything. Could also be in my day-to-day work with my stakeholder. What I'm bringing to the agenda to my customer, what I'm bringing to my suppliers, what are we discussing about? And yeah, so again, maybe it's not a direct correlation, but if you have all these type of metrics, you can start to monitor the journey and see what type of intervention you can do.
Yeah. So you can clearly see that it is measurable when you,
Yes. And
yes.
and then you can go into details. For example, if you take the talent processes, I think the beauty that we are moving away from forcing. A few years ago, there was inclusive hiring where you forced pools of candidates. First of all, I think the mentality is coming there that more diverse pool is better, but we don't need to force. Already structure interview process, asking the same set of questions to all candidates and not asking a different question because
Sure.
you have a different dimension,
Yeah.
being asking a woman, again,
Sure.
stereotyping.
We all know those.
What about your husband? I mean, in a promotion discussion at senior level, maybe she will not accept the role because the husband is not mobile. What has to do husband and wife and partners into all this spectrum, and would be the same question asked to a different gender.
Yeah.
So yeah, structuring, for example. And you can measure if it is structure and blah, blah, blah. So you can go down to all
Yeah.
levels for measuring.
Yeah. Yeah. Coming back to the fact that it's either strategic or it's not, what kind of advice would you give CEOs and top line management around the? I mean, you've seen what works, you've seen what doesn't work in reality. I think you've also seen what D&I washing is all about, what lip service is about. So, what kind of advice would you give, Luisa?
Yeah, I mean, if you talk about the top of the house, there is a huge role to play. Setting the tone from the top is fundamental. If the top of the house doesn't talk about it, and I know I should say believe it, but I'm gonna be very honest, you still may need to do a lot of work in convincing the top. Still, they need to play a role in setting the tone. And then, if possible, they really also need to do the next step, which is becoming role models. And role models doesn't mean to do the big stuff. Small signs that matters. I give you a very positive example, which again, it's very basic, but it's so powerful. We had a change of chief HR or a chief HR officer recently in the Grundfos. And then yesterday there was the first town hall of the chief HR officer, and she didn't talk during the town hall. I think send a very strong signal. We'll perceive she's a strong ally of the journey.
So
So
everybody knows that was a choice. It was a deliberate choice to have that
yes,
as a
yes,
background. Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
So I would say really set the tone, be role model, do small things, but do it consistently.
Being an advocate.
Yeah, and having
Yeah.
the affinity to the topic to be able to ask the right question.
These are not big steps, and if you can educate yourself, I mean, all the information, the specialists are in-house. So why is it that so few actually do this, Luisa? Have you found an answer to that?
Well, I have my own answer, and I'm smiling because maybe it's not the traditional answer, and it's fear. Again, I'm using fear, knowing it's quite provocative. But first of all, it's not an area where any of us will ever be an expert. That was also something I learned when I accepted my first role in this space. It's not a role where, especially many years ago, you learn from someone. You don't really know what you're doing because one of the risks of this role is there are so many different angles you can tackle that unless you're very strategic, let me say, and very focused, the risk is dispersing energy rather than having an impact. As a senior executive or as a leader in a company, not many people feel comfortable in being vulnerable. What do I need to do? What if I do wrong? There is also this element of your perception and your status, if I may say, which is put a little bit into question, right?
Yes.
And that is, I know it sounds basic, but back to human nature. Exactly.
Things. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, executive are human being, even if sometimes we believe they are astronauts, if I can use this analogy, eventually we are all human beings.
That is true. And, there might be some young D&I professionals watching us in this conversation today. What kind of advice would you give to somebody who sets out on this journey, who says, oh, I'm value driven. This is what I want to do. I want to make an impact. What kind of advice would you give knowing what you know now?
And I hope there are many that still have this energy, because it's a
You
field
need
that needs
energy.
fresh energy and motivation.
Yes.
So learn change management, communication, all the tools that are needed to drive an influential change. If you need to bring systemic changes, you need to understand how the system works. Become familiar with best practices. There are plenty of business case. Peer community are wonderful. I mean, I think in D&I, it's really a generous area.
Yes.
Well, you really need to be able, the secret, the skill, the art is to be able to customize for the specific need, the maturity level need, business case of the organization.
Yeah. I'm always admiring your stance on all of this and the way you talk about D&I and also what you have achieved. So I know a lot needs to be come from within you in terms of motivation, because the organization doesn't always do that for you, as you say. What keeps you going, Luisa?
First of all, it's a never boring job. Today challenge is different from yesterday, will be different from tomorrow. And you really have an opportunity to influence across the company. My regular stakeholder, of course, are HR people, but I talk to business people, I talk to country leader, I talk to employees, shop floor, external customer, supplier, startup in itself. So it
Yes.
is this vibrant feeling of trying to juggle multiple balls at the same time. And as I said, it's heartwarming, but the feeling that whatever small or big goal is achieved has an impact on people.
Uh-huh.
One people benefit, job done, is their life. Even in one progress matters. As one hiring decision being done inclusively, it matters.
Yeah. I think there we definitely see eye to eye. It's all about crossing the river with putting little stones to make the path to cross the river, and not in big leaps. And to be able to treasure that also as an achievement, that's important to keep the motivation going.
Yeah. And if you allow me, I will stole your analogy. There is a lot of value in getting to this profession with some professional experience. Maybe it's not a status type of role. Yes, you get a big title, whatever, but it's not the typical big status job. It's gives you a constant connection to the reality of the organization. The conversation you have are often eye-opener and tells you the reality. This constant connection with employees.
Indeed. Indeed. Maybe as a last question, Luisa, if you would have a magic wand and you could take away any barrier in an organization or a couple of barriers, what is your top priority?
Well, there are two. One is more about the individual and the other one is about organization. There's a bias you cannot take away from people. You can make them aware, but then it takes a lot of energy to counteract. So if I can
So it's
really
the
just...
people like us syndrome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
People like us in the room, things we have done in the past, what should we change? And the other one is related. Then you need a lot of trust to change. And again, especially in corporate worlds where still finance rules, it means it's asking a big leap faith sometimes to say, trust, that's the right things to do. And yes, maybe you cannot measure in a traditional way with a clear correlation to a return on investment.
Yeah. Very clear, Luisa.
Can you give me the magic wand, Elf?
I would if I could, definitely.
I know.
But you're waving it one step at a time, Luisa.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for the conversation. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on Borderless Executive Life today. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Elf, and thank you to Borderless.
Pleasure.